Welcome, everybody. What you're about to hear is a conversation I hosted a few months back with Nance for an epic marathon stream. We had on Bryan Weeks, who's been a co-conspirator, collaborator, friend, fellow traveler, etc. for a long time at Theory Underground. And so it was a very cool opportunity to bring him on so that he could talk about what he cares about, which is always about education and the role it plays in turning us into humans, really, and what can be done about this situation where it seems like school is more of a tool of oppression than of liberation. Well, that's what he's doing. That's what we're talking about. But also, he's the instructor of the course that's coming up next week. It begins on June 13th. It goes into the first week, actually, of July. So the last session we'll do for this is on July 4th. And I've got the thumbnail image up on the screen for you if you are watching this on YouTube. If you're listening to this on podcast, then the thumbnail for the course, the poster for the course with all of the information should be the thumbnail of the actual episode. So whether you're watching this on Spotify or iHeartRadio or Podcast Addict or Overcast or Google or Apple Podcasts, it doesn't matter. You should be able to look at that just fine. Also, if you do tend to listen to this stuff on YouTube, you should also go on your preferred podcast platform and make sure to follow Theory Underground. And if you have fond feelings in your heart for Theory Underground and the work that I've been doing here, I work my ass off. Go ahead and say something nice. It helps. It really does. Because I promise you, the people who don't say nice things, they don't hold back. So if you've got nice stuff to say, if you've got love in your heart, let it out. With that, we're going to turn it over to this episode. Let's go. All right, everybody, welcome to Theory Underground. I'm your host, David McKerracher. My co-host here is Nance. This recording is going to be published in the future. You'll be able to listen to it on podcast and YouTube. Fact is, the live stream side of it is garbage right now. So a lot of you will hopefully be able to see it then, right? In the future, because this is a part of an epic marathon live stream where our internet, or at least mine, went to shit. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over here to Nance while I eat some food, and he's going to set up Bryan with what he was just saying about the day and the themes that have emerged, as well as the ones that we kind of went in thinking about. And so you can bring that all back around to Illich, which is what we're ultimately here to talk about. Okay.
So before we had, 15, 20-minute little break here where we were trying to address the technical difficulties. Bryan and I were talking a little bit about the day so far, the stream. We've had a lot of guests come on, and there have been some interesting themes that kind of range from like religion and culture and cultural engineering and the impending collapse of the world as we know it. And Bryan piped right in and was like, yeah, man, that's really interesting because in Illich, there's this and that. And he really kind of took it away. So I don't even want to waste any more time. And Bryan, without further ado, what's happening? What's up? Tell us all about Illich.
Hey, all right. So one of the things you brought up, Nance, was I don't remember who you're talking about. They're talking about just this worry that the world is going to hell and we're all doomed. And I'm like, I would assume a majority of the Theory Underground audience, there's a sense that is true. I'm not convinced it's inevitable, but it is definitely a thing that I worry about immensely. And I think the reason I'm here and joining today is because I am doing a course on Ivan Illich in June into July, and I want to invite people to join it and kind of explore Illich together. And so the sort of impetus for me came from like two directions. The first direction it came because Dave and Mikey did the Nick Land course. It was a 4-week course. It was a major introduction for me. Like Land's name had been, in my sphere of knowledge, but nothing more for many years. And so it was a great opportunity for me to kind of understand a thinker that I find very troublesome better. And the model of the sort of 4-week, here we go, I immediately was thinking, and I like within a day sent a message to Dave and was like, we need to do this for Illich. Because there are a lot of commonalities where Land had kind of built his own extra academic organization, and they were exploring different approaches to thinking about our situation in the 20th and 21st century. Illich similarly had his own organization in Mexico that he was bringing a ton of intellectuals and scholars and people from around the world to, as well as nobody you've ever heard of. I mean, anybody was invited. And that was a huge part of what he was doing. So that aspect alone made me think like, this is another way to put theory underground into the context of this larger history of groups that have been doing things like this. And so that came up. But the more existential thing for me was, I think when I'm a high school teacher, and when ChatGPT 3 it was that dropped, it changed the game dramatically. And it was the first, like, I knew that AI was a thing on everyone's mind, and in the developing world, it's been a big deal for years. But for me, it was the first time I saw really what its potential could be. Like, I got this like real sense, like, this is spooky, when I got on. And immediately what worried me was, we get a lot of communications from, like, I have a master's degree from Boise State, so I'm on like the listserv, and I still get a ton of communications because that's how they keep you in the loop and stuff. And I'm like constantly getting these emails from the education department, like, come join this, X, Y, and Z number of weeks certification course on how to incorporate AI into your classroom. And there's a lot of buzz about incorporating tools like GPT into classrooms and things like that. And there's very little stopping to ask, at what cost? And that's a big question for me. And whenever I listen to a podcast with like people who are in the industry, I only go away scared most of the time, because I'm not like, I don't know enough to like really understand how it's going, but people in the industry are worried, and that worries me. Right. And it was the first time that I really got the sense like, this is a potentially an existential threat. And there are people saying that out loud who know better than me. And so maybe I should be worried, like in a very, very real way. And there are a number of thinkers that we can turn to think through like what exactly it is that we should have in mind for a response to something so major. But I think Ivan Illich is one of the thinkers that will do us tremendous benefit in this process. And he's somebody who kind of shot up in the 70s and was really popular because he really liked to, ruffle feathers, and he wasn't scared to do so. But he kind of like fizzled out and died in obscurity. But some of his best work comes from that later period. So I kind of designed a course, or I'm in the process of designing it. We still have a few months before I'll lock it in, going through the four of the major works from across his career as a thinker, starting in the 70s when he wrote Deschooling Society, which is the book I would say the majority of people I know who know his name have read. And then we'll move through a few other works to his final work in the mid 90s. He wrote just about 10 years before he died. And I think that will give us a way to kind of not only like understand Illich, which I think is really important. And that was the initial kind of goal, was just like, here's a course so you can understand Illich. But what I like more and more, and I have some things that I want to do to suss out what I mean by this, but like more and more, I want it to be, how can we use Illich to think about 21st century issues? Because he, like, at the end of his career, he was like, he was clued in that cybernetics was a thing, and he started thinking about it, and then he died, right? So he hadn't put a ton of thought into exactly what we talked about in the land course for those who were there, or basically like the issue of our day is, are computers going to become sentient, and should we let them? And if they're not, what capability can they have nonetheless? What effect will they have on the world? How will they affect our own intellect, curiosity, and basic way of living? I think those are huge questions that I want the course to help us wrestle with, not answer, but wrestle with in a really meaningful way. So,
yeah, I'm not convinced that we will see sentient artificial intelligence. I am convinced eventually it'll happen. However, I am also convinced that we are locked in on a crash course with just total failure and destruction unless something miraculous happens.
yeah.
So what can Illich help us come up with from your perspective?
So Illich is like this major thorn in my side and has been for years. Like half the time I'll read his books of like irritated at how simple they are, but nonetheless, I consistently think about the things he says, and it's constantly a challenge to me. As a high school teacher, like I'm constantly like challenged, and I can't let the challenge go. But he's also incredibly hard to pin down exactly where he stands. A lot from every book, he kind of changes his lingo, and so I've really struggled to kind of pin down or even like figure out a way to talk about Illich to those who don't understand his work, so that you can get a foothold. So I was thinking maybe the best way to approach this, and Dave, I know you're in the background somewhere, probably listening. Feel free to jump in at any point, because this is kind of something Dave and I have talked about a little while, and I know it's a reading of the Republic that I'm pretty sure he got from Professor Bierman at North Idaho College some years ago. But I was thinking, so in like, I'm going to do a shitty reading of the Republic, or a part of the Republic, which doesn't fully like capture Illich's perspective, nor does it fully capture what the Republic's really doing. But I think it elucidates the issue that's at the center of Illich's thought. And I can't think of any better way to do it. So in the second book of the Republic, Socrates and Glaucon are talking about justice, with the whole goal of figuring out and defining as clearly as possible what justice is. They've kind of come to loggerheads, and they have no, like, they're still like, well, this is not sufficient. And Socrates proposes that basically, if we want to understand how a person can be just, maybe the approach is to expand out to a larger picture and see how what a just society would look like. And if we can pinpoint justice in a society, we might be able to then bring it back and discover justice in the individual and have a much clearer picture of justice. So what happens is they agree that that's a good approach. Okay. And Socrates moves on, and he begins to describe what he thinks a just state would look like. And there are a number of things in the way he organizes this just state that I think Illich would go, wait, I don't want to say anything about that. So putting a lot of the specialization pieces aside, because Socrates basically says, yeah, you'd need a handful of people, because you'd have the person who grows the food, and you'd have the person who makes the tools, and then you'd have the traders between different states, and they'd all kind of fulfill their role, and it's good. And then he writes toward the end, or Plato writes, sorry, let us consider, first of all, what will be their way of life, now that we have thus established them. They will not produce corn, grain, and wine, and clothes, and shoes, and build houses for themselves. And when they are housed, they will work in summer, commonly stripped and barefoot, but in winter substantially clothed and shod. They will feed on barley meal and flour and wheat, baking and kneading them, making noble cakes and loaves. These they will serve up on a mat of reeds or on clean leaves, themselves reclining the while upon beds strewn with yew or myrtle. And they and their children will feast, drinking of the wine which they have made, wearing garlands on their heads, and hymning the praises of the gods, in happy converse with one another. and they will take care that their families do not exceed their means, having an eye to poverty or war. And then Glaucon, being Glaucon, goes, yeah, but can't there be a little like more flavor, a little relish or flavor in their food? And he goes, sure, let's give them olives and beans and stuff, but nothing more. And Glaucon's like, why you should give them the ordinary conveniences of life. People are to be comfortable or accustomed to lie on sofas and dine off tables, and they should have sauces and sweets in the modern style. And then, so basically Glaucon's like, that seems too rustic. Like, we need some luxuries, man. Like, let's talk about like the luxurious society. So basically Socrates has presented what he thinks would a just, well-ordered society would look like. And Glaucon's like, yeah, but what about the nice stuff? We want sofas and couches and sauces and TVs. And, you know, like this would be our response. And he's like, well, the question which you would have me consider is not only how a state, but how a luxurious state is created. And so here's where I think we get claws on Illich. If the rest of the Republic, or much of the rest of the Republic, Socrates is trying to work with this problem of what would a luxurious, just, well-ordered state look like, which they ultimately can't fully come to a conclusion about. Illich spent his career showing how that's impossible. And every book, from Deschooling Society to Tools of Conviviality to Shadow Work, is a way of showing these contradictions that we find anytime that we move toward luxury or progress or unlimited growth, these things that drive our society. We've actually forced ourselves into corners of compulsive activity. We've forced ourselves to work more and more so that we can have nicer and nicer things. And each book will explore different areas of society and different institutions and tool groupings that basically cause this problem to emerge, which is a sticky problem because we then have to wrestle, how simple do we want to go if we want to get rid of all these compulsive things, right?
So there's a tension between being able to have everything on demand at my fingertips and having to go out and make my own nice things.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And how much those nice things get in the way of mutual human relationships. There's going to be another added component here that we don't find like on the pages of the Republic. Well, we do, because they all lay on the afternoon singing hymns, drinking wine, and having a basically good time. Right. But in order to get if you follow the Republic, in order to get the luxury that Glaucon wants, you need a system of guardians, you need a philosopher king, you need a lot of poor people doing a bunch of stuff they don't want to do to keep things moving, right? It becomes really complicated really quick. And it kind of like Illich's point, it seems to always be, yeah, but could we reconfigure things to keep those luxury? He's not anti-luxury, but let's decide which ones are most essential. That's kind of the starting point of the question. What really is essential? Because here we are on the internet. In order to get where, like, Socrates is in that very first example, like we can't be doing what we're doing now. So the question is always, and that we'll wrestle with in the course, is which of these things are essential, and how does Illich's view on that question develop and mature throughout his works? He does end up having a much more sort of systemic reading of things as he goes on, and recognize just like it's a web of complicated relationships that we really struggle to untangle, and I think his work was very unfinished. And so for those who are interested, we kind of become inheritors of that project and really need to keep working through the unfinished thought.
This is where it actually ties in really good with Andre Gorz, right? Because the whole point is well, especially following what Baudrillard has to say in The Mirror of Production, need is a bullshit category at this point. The program will resume shortly, right after this DIY commercial that is not for any sponsor other than ourselves. Thank you for watching.
Whether we are already fully in the grip of the techno-capital AI singularity or not, we likely feel as though there's not much we can do.
As allies of future generations, we aren't giving up so easily.
To quote the author of Manifesto, the Mad Farmer Liberation Front, we wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what our life and our children's lives may be.
This fear is not new. The question of technology, media, and institutions became unavoidable in the 20th century. Yet when we think of institutions, the most radical critiques people have encountered came from either Michel Foucault or Jürgen Habermas. These thinkers towered over the theory scene in the 1970s and 80s as radicals took their long march through the institutions.
When it comes to theories of social change, the tendency is to put our hopes in leaving the existing institutions, the current order failing, or some overnight revolution to bring us salvation. Otherwise, we lean in and do the best we can with what's afforded by the existing institutions. Reform or revolution, nothing ever changes, so we keep putting our hopes in education.
So progressives say, if only more people had access to better education, then that would solve the problems. But they have not thought seriously enough about the nature of our institutions, or this thing called education that they offer.
The most radical critiques of schooling that teachers encounter issue from Paulo Freire, Bell Hooks, and Henry Giraud, but none of these ever got to the root of institutions themselves. The theorist who did this was Ivan Illich.
Gaining brief stardom in the 70s, Ivan Illich was the father of the deschooling movement, inspiring hundreds of radical schools and generations of homeschooling parents. But this characterization of his work as the anti-school guy was his ultimate demise, for that only takes account of a surface level of his work. Illich was immediately misunderstood and quickly abandoned.
The issue goes far beyond schools. We spend our entire lives mediated through institutions that totalize, instrumentalize, and reduce humans, all of our possibilities, to something predictable, calculable, and exchangeable, easy to control. The interests of state and capital here overlap entirely. Our desires are thus turned into commodities and our time energy into labor power. Illich doesn't stop here, though, for institutions are not the whole picture.
When people think of schooling today, they think of studying for exams, not learning for the sake of learning. When people think of hospitals, they think of treating illnesses, not human-to-human care and well-being. When people think of transportation, they think of speed and efficiency, not the possibility of sustained, regular, and meaningful connections. When people think of reading, they think of collecting information, not lingering with an idea. The move from schooling to scolae requires serious inquiry into the conditions of possibility for this mode.
I'm calling for a sincere and earnest revival of Illich. While most introductions to Illich limit their engagement to his earlier works, a series of polemics against schooling and institutionalized consumer society, I want to go deeper and lead us to a more robust understanding of who and what a human is for Illich. With his help, we will reopen the question of what we are, what we can be, and the types of lives we are willing to give our time and energy to bring into being, if there are to be humans in the future.
This course begins on June 13th and goes through July 4th, 2024. It meets on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can enroll at theoryunderground.com/courses/Illich-1, or just click on the link in the description. For those who just want to spend a month really thinking about schooling and institutions, this is a fantastic way to do so. But for those who are looking to go deeper with a community of truth seekers who are going beyond the current theory scene to form an intellectual milieu, this is a fantastic way to do so, because the Theory Underground 2024 conference at the end of October 23rd through 27th is going to have special panels for presentations related to this course. Any student of this course will have opportunities to present, and those presentations can ultimately culminate in submissions that may be accepted into the anthology we are doing on the critique of schooling and education, to be published either at the end of this year or at the beginning of 2025.
Thank you. We hope to see you there.
So need is this bullshit category, right? So we think we need this, we think we need that. And even like you'll get Marxists who are just like, well, if people buy it, then that says they need it in like this very strict economic sense, right? Well, are we thinking about an actual future here? An actual future? Because there's no actual future where we get to just endlessly consume everything forever, right? Unless, of course, we can come up with like the Star Trek machine that will just, print whatever out of thin air. Until then, this is the situation we're in. And as far as, freeing up time energy goes and harnessing automation, it can't be infinite automation for every little new thing that people want. No, we're going to actually have to figure out what's necessary, restrict automation and the realm of heteronomous labor to the reproduction of or just what's necessary. But then we get to create outside of that all kinds of things, obviously with our time energy, but these two things are separate. And like what all is considered necessary would be the real politics, right? Like that would be real politics. And you would have people on these different sides. Someone would be inevitably like, Hannah Montana bobbleheads, they're still relevant. We need to keep making them. And no one would join their party and it would be fine, hopefully. But this question of what's necessary is an absolute, like, you must tarry with that question. And this has nothing to do with degrowth. I know that's where, in our conversation on Gores with Daniel Tutt, that's where he instantly went, was this is like that degrowth tendency. Well, it doesn't have to be, because it doesn't have to be the main emphasis, but also, yeah, like there are people who live in houses that have, 20 bedrooms they don't use. I'm sorry. Like what, you think that we can live in a future that is like, where that's just going to be normal like that? So anyway, I just want to say, I love this. I love what you're on about. I did miss a significant portion of it when I was running downstairs and trying to get things figured out. We're back, I think, live. I think we lost the audience. Some people joined on the back end, and the reason we're back live is because I dropped the stream kilobits per second down to 1,000 instead of 8,000. So now I'm under where it was at before. So I think we're fine. It's probably just going to come through a bit pixelated, but people should at least be able to hear us. And so let's just kind of keep working with it. But with all that said, Bryan, I kind of hate that this happened, but your time got messed up because of this streaming issue. I guess, what do we want to say with the time that remains?
That's okay. I didn't have an hour's worth of things to say. So I think another thing, so I kind of wanted to talk about Tolkien a little bit, if you don't mind. It turns out over the last 2 years, I've discovered I like Tolkien a lot, and I keep constantly coming back to his work. I didn't grow up like a Tolkien, like absolute lover. I watch the movies like any other person in my generation, but in the last couple of years, it's been a thing that I've discovered that Lord of the Rings is kick-ass, and I don't apologize for that. But there's kind of like, I was telling Nance, Dave, I don't know if you were listening and at that point, but Illich is incredibly hard to pin down. And so like the last time we talked, it was like wandering in abstractions, it felt like, when I reflect back on that. And so like I've been trying to like find these areas into his work for people who don't know it yet but might become interested. And I think Tolkien's essay on fairy stories is a really cool essay to maybe think about the second half of Illich's career. So the first half and the first two books that I want to read in June are Deschooling Society and Tools of Conviviality, which really deal extensively with the sort of issues of institutions and unlimited growth and things like that. those books came in the 70s, while Illich's like public career was exploding. Later on, that all fizzled out, and he kind of became an itinerant professor at Penn State and then in Europe and things like that. But he also became more of an academic writer, and he turned to his roots as a historian. And one thing I found interesting is the way he talked about his practice of history, and to me, it really lines up with some of the things that Tolkien has to say about fairy stories and fantasy in the essay on fairy stories. So you might be familiar, but probably not, with this word, Morifok. Can you guys see that?
No, I'm not. Yeah, I can see it.
Morifok. I don't think there's an official pronunciation of that. So I'm going to read a little bit of this essay and then I'll talk about it. Just Morifok, Morifok is a fantastic word, but it could be seen written up in every town in this land. It is coffee room viewed from the inside through a glass door, as it was seen by Dickens on a dark London day, and it was used by Chesterton to denote the queerness of things that have become trite when they are seen suddenly from a new angle. The word Morifok may cause you to suddenly realize that England is an utterly alien land, lost either in some remote past age, glimpsed by history, or in some strange dim future to be reached only by a time machine. To see the amazing oddity and interest of its inhabitants and their customs and feeding habits. But it cannot do more than that, act as a time telescope focused on one spot. Creative fantasy, because it is mainly trying to do something else, make something new, may open your hoard and let all the locked things fly away like caged birds. And I think what Illich was doing with his more historical pieces, and from what I've heard him discuss in interviews, is he talks about this. He wanted to take his students back to another time, and they were typically reading in the original language of the things they were working, so often in Latin or in French or in Italian, to another time and another language, to get that sense that things are incredibly odd, or the queerness of things that have otherwise become trite. Like our everyday life seems the normal one until you understand even a sliver of history, a time that's nothing like our own. And then everything looks different because all of a sudden it doesn't feel as essential or necessary. Tolkien later in the essay talks about one of the things he loves about fantasy, or the things that he believed that fantasy does, is because it creates the secondary world that's different from the primary world we live in. It can leave behind the things of the primary world that we all hate, which puts light on the things. And that's why so many of his stories resonate. Is he talks about lamps. He's like, electric lamps are so annoying and stupid, but in the fantasy world, they're not a necessary part of the environment. So you can go back to appreciating a tree is kind of the example. And I think this historical view in Illich, like it is, and this is sort of my thesis, not his, but it's going to be a thing that I take seriously in the course, is looking back at these moments in history for him, the 12th century, and what was going on with books and literacy and letters in the 12th century, is a way for us to step out of our moment in time and then start working through creative fantasies and thinking toward secondary realities that could someday become our primary reality, right? So instead of like Tolkien, fantasy becomes this sort of, which a lot of like crappy fantasy is just awful, really uncomfortable medievalism. I don't think Tolkien is that at all, but like that is what it kind of becomes in a lot of ways. But like this is also a maneuver that is totally valuable in thinking toward futures possibly too. And I think Illich is someone who gives us tools to work with, to step out of what we take as automatic and normal and everyday and inescapable, and recognize like even the way we treat a book, which is the topic of the fourth book on the list, is very unique to our time. And actually it's that particular approach to book, our approach to books, is dying. And so to understand the way it's dying is we have to go back and understand the way it was born, is kind of his thesis in the vineyard of the text. And it's fascinating. So
I didn't know you've been getting really into Tolkien, but I guess it does make sense. He was in your piece in Underground Theory, actually, right? You had mentioned the dancing pattering of Tom Bombadil's feet. You know, still, I forget exactly how you said it, but yeah, it was beautiful.
I don't either. And Gandalf's 17-year study that the movies just get oh so wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm just about done again with the Return of the King. It's really sad.
You're reading it?
Yeah. In the evening.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we still have a half hour left, and
I have 15 minutes. Or are we on till 4:30?
We're on till 4:30, but you don't have to be here till 4:30.
Yeah. Ideally 4:50. I'm riding my bike home.
All right. Well, to the people who are joining now on this new live stream, welcome back, everybody. We've this part 3 in the stream will just start in the middle of Bryan talking about whatever he was talking about when you joined at the beginning, for the people watching this in the future. But everybody who's listening to this on podcast, you're just annoyed that I keep interjecting this stuff about the stream. And look, it's almost seamless when I can do both at the same time. But as soon as the stream goes to shit, it's like, well, man, how annoying. But anyway, all right. So where are we at? I guess, you know, Nance, you have a better sense for where we've been and where this is go. Or what do you?
I do think before we got back recording and streaming and all that, you had just got to the point where Illich says essentially waste will either be seen as a curse or freedom or something. If you want, I think that'd be interesting to go into, because I think I want to defend my right to be wasteful from the perspective of capital or our overlords or whatever, to be economically unproductive. I think that's something important to hang on to. I think that's something that can help us define our demands for the future.
So I was talking about this quote from Shadow Work, which is one of the later books of essays. But he's talking about unemployment and just the different ways of approaching the question of unemployment, but how we approach the question says a lot about a society. The choice for or against the notion of man as a growth addict decides whether unemployment, that is, the effective liberty to work free from wages and or salary, shall be viewed as sad and a curse, or as useful and a right. And so that must be right where we got interrupted. He did write a whole book that we won't read in the course, but is because the topics get covered elsewhere, but it's called The Right to Useful Unemployment. And it is kind of making this larger argument that human free autonomous time is basic. Like, it is what matters. Like, we've convinced ourselves that like we need to have control over everyone's time in a society or in the world in general, and development initiatives in the third world are basically initiatives to get control over other people's times and their time. And there is no value for unstructured, undetermined time in which you use to fulfill whatever projects that are meaningful to you. And I think it's just like, it's a sticky point in the work, because I think, you know, this invites questions of what about lazy people and things like that. But a generous reading, at least at first, because lazy people exist. I'll grant that. It's a real thing. But I think the refreshing thing in Illich's work is there's like just a really fundamental belief that people care about their lives, which is crazy that that's like an outlandish view, but like, it's just like, yeah, I think people care about their life and having a decent one. I think that's just inherent to like most people. And so, yeah, occasionally there be people who just kind of squander it, whatever. Like for the most part, if you give them the opportunity, people will do what they need.
I think
Not everyone's going to
that's
be an
it.
intellectual. Not everyone's going to like do the things we do, but like they're going to be sitting doing their thing, thinking we should be doing it, right? And it's just like I think that's a refreshing view to me because not many people hold it, not as like a core value or belief.
Yeah. I think it's definitely fair to imagine that given, like you said, given the opportunity and the resources, the tools, the support, all these things, people will want to lift themselves up out of whatever slop they find themselves in. And then, yeah, I mean, there's always going to be lazy people, whatever, but it won't. I do think those will be the outliers. It's interesting that time is, I don't know, the metric of the machine that is kind of running the show. If you are taking your time and doing what you want to do for yourself, then you're being wasteful and you've been cursed. And that's another one of the threads that has been going kind of throughout the day. And I just find that interesting. I mean, maybe if you want to real quick touch on, I guess, Illich's vision of education, maybe where it was and what happened to it, and what he tried to do with his experiments. I mean, if you got what, 10 minutes left?
Yeah. Maybe I'll just kind of go through a couple, I think, teasers that he lays in the introduction of Deschooling Society. So ultimately at ground level, Illich believes that people are fundamentally curious and they like are gonna, like we were just talking about, they're gonna, basically every person is gonna want to like do for their life what matters. And that like we naturally are curious and pursue learning opportunities for whatever it is that we're interested in. We're like pretty good at finding other people who are interested in what we're interested in, and making learning happen. And so what he's doing in Deschooling Society and in his other works is there's kind of this double relation with like institutions and tools. Like our attitudes and views shape what tools we have in our society, like what we deem as important. But the reverse direction is something he's really keen to point out, is the way that the tools tend to undermine the things that they were initially created for. And school is like the prime example. And so the idea of the book is basically, he's like, I'm not out here to be after schools and schools alone, but if you can see this at work in school as an institution, you can see it across the institutional spectrum. And so if a school was created for the purpose of education, is kind of what we would all respond in some manner or another. He writes, this is in the introduction, so this gives a taste, and this is definitely a polemical work, so you get a flavor of it here too. Universal education through schooling is not feasible. It would be no more feasible if it were attempted by means of alternative institutions built on the style of present schools. Neither new attitudes of teachers toward their pupils, nor the proliferation of educational hardware or software in classroom or bedroom, nor finally the attempt to expand the pedagogue's responsibility until it engulfs his pupils' lifetimes, will deliver universal education. The point being that like you're never going to capture everybody and universally get everyone to the same point. Like, and then the rest of the book is going to explore ways that in fact it undermines it, right? You can see when you look at data too, especially like the decrease in the number of people who read like as adults, and ultimately what education is going to become is just like the institution of schools themselves is going to become a sorting system, which is like investigated at length in the book, but it becomes a sorting system for people who are willing to play by the rules, and maybe they are intelligent, it's at some level, but they're also playing by the rules to advance through the system. And anybody who's left behind, then education has just been this commodity that they have not achieved, or they have not gotten, rather than the natural, intrinsic, organic learning that all, like, I've got a 2-year-old, you've got kids, like, kids just like, what's this? And adults do that too. We're just kind of trained out of thinking it's important or that it matters. Because if it's not attached to some licensure or diploma at the end of a process or something like that, it has no political or social validity. To the extent that he, like, one of his recommendations is, it's an extreme one in the book, but I'm like, is it that extreme? But people treat it like it is that employers should not be, like, there should be laws banning employers from asking about your education. Basically, like, you can't ask for high school, college, diplomas or anything, because all that tells you is that a person is capable of getting through high school, not what they know. And so that's going to be like kind of the bouncing off point in deschooling, but it just kind of, once you understand the larger pieces that he's doing there, the other books really kind of come into play too, or into focus. Where are we at? 5 minutes.
Excellent. Good work. I do have a question, but I know you're probably about to say something, so I'll let you say it. But well, I just want to, you maybe you could kind of re-invite the audience to this course. Of course, for people who might have already heard it because the stream's been in and out and stuff like that, repetition's fine. Okay, first of all, but also maybe because I want to hear a little bit more about how your approach to teaching this course in June, July, how it has developed over the last couple of months as you've prepared.
That's what I was getting ready to get to anyway, because I figured that's a natural, good closing point. The thing I want to say is, like, I don't think this is necessarily a course for everybody, but I do want to invite fellow travelers who take, like, the ideas that we've been talking about in this hour, like, are concerned about the things that we've been concerned about or found things interesting. Join us, right? Join us, please. This will be different than the Nick Land course. As I develop it, the Nick Land course was presented as, like, you don't need to do any of the reading. Everything is suggested. And I didn't do any of the reading, and I took liberty not to, and I'm glad I didn't. But my pitch is that I would like everybody who joins the course to do the readings in the course. Obviously, there's no police, do what you're going to do. But, like, I mean, that's, like, come prepared to do the readings and be a reader on the journey. I think it will pay off in the end. Even if you don't think of yourself as someone who reads a ton right now, these are not hard books. They're challenging to pin down what he's really getting at, but the language itself is super readable. There are 4 books. We're going to read 1 book a week. Each book is 120 pages or so. And only one is bigger than that. It's 125. That means it's a 3 to 4 hour read for your average reader. Okay. So it's, like, not a huge time commitment. But I'm thinking this as, like, a course rather than a class. To me, a class has, like, connotations of, like, you're just going to be taught a bunch of material, whereas a course connotes a path or a way. And this is the path through Illich's thought. And we're going to be on the course together. And I just take my job to be the sort of the leader of the trek down the path, right? So that hopefully by the time we get to In the Vineyard of the Text, which I think is his most mature work, his most complicated work, his most academic work, but his most fruitful work, that prior reading will all kind of, like, contextualize what's really happening there. And you can see the moves that he's been doing. And also, by the time we're at that book, he's probing what a reader is. And so having gone through the process of being the reader, if you're not already, but I'm assuming if you're in an audience here, you probably already are a reader. As readers, the book's to us and was to himself in a certain sense. It's a critical engagement with what it is that we do. And it's uncomfortable, but it's more uncomfortable if you're doing the reading in a productive way, because he's going to question bookishness. And I'm bookish. I read a lot. But that's also connected to institutional values, and he reveals that. And so I think it's been great, and we're going to do it in 4 weeks. And what else did I miss that I think that covers it? A lot. The other stuff is still in, like, I'm still working it out, because only so much can be done in 4 weeks. We will not cover everything he ever wrote.
So you just said that he questions books and that they are sort of like, there's a bookishness kind of comes with this idea of institutions. But you also say in the quote that I actually have up on the screen, the speech bubble coming out from you, says Illich is not the anti-school lunatic people take him to be, but instead revolutionizes how we think about and use our tools. And I remember we had a conversation about this. I almost used the word institutions there because you were saying institutions are tools for him. And so so bookishness has something to do with institutions. Yeah, but what's the problem with that? He doesn't have a problem with institutions, right?
No, he's just trying to elucidate more clearly what our relationship is and how this goes back to, like, the farther in life he got, the more sort of like he started to see this systemic issue and how everything's so interrelated. And so he says in Tools of Conviviality that the book is like one of the convivial tools par excellence. Convivial meaning is like he's endorsing it, because it is a massively available, like, underground theory could be printed by you, received within weeks, and distributed immediately. That is an amazing thing that you don't rely on massive overhead to make happen. And that's been a great thing about the book. But the book is also to, like, think of like Ill's term technique. The technique of reading and the technique of printing changed our relationship to information to where it became based on production, growth, and centered those values, because now you can say, I read this book and I crossed it off my list. And so it shifts the way we think about reading, whereas the monkish reading that he's at the center of this change is a reading and rumination over long periods of time on incredibly short texts, whereas bookish people, we blow through texts. Like, I forget the exact text number, but at one point Illich was in the hospital, and this is why I say it's self-critique. At some point he was in a hospital. I forget what the occurrence was. He had nothing else to do, and he had a list. He's like, these are the 30 books I'm going to read in the next 2 days, kind of thing. Like, he thought the way we do about books. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be really aware of what our reading practice is, how that transfers into our whole, like, practice of living in the world. So.
Excellent. Check out the course, everybody. Introduction to Ivan Illich, Reimagining Tools and Society. It's going to be on Thursdays at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time. This might be the first course that we've done that is in the AM for the Eastern side of the country. And then 1700 CET. And it's going to be June 13th, 20th, 27th, and July 4th, because we don't give a fuck.
That's
right.
All that shit.
Yeah. You'll never ever see me do something on Christmas Day. You'll never ever see me do something on Christmas Day. You might see me do something a couple days before. You'll probably see me do stuff on Halloween. 4th of July, abso-fucking-lutely. You know, some things have to remain sacred, but you know what? Freedom.
Not that shit.
No, man. There's no better way to be independent than to be independent from Independence Day, right?
There we
So
go.
the true Americans read Ivan Illich and talk about him in Bryan's course at Theory Underground. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for speaking through all of the distractions. I mean, it's clear that you teach children where you wouldn't have been able to do that. So thank you.
You betcha. Adios.
Adios,
Peace out, man.
amigo.
Thank you.
Take care.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of the bullshit and just want to get down to it. Big ideas, rigorous thinking, and ultimately liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation. Theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. Besides a commitment to publishing certain underground theorists and popularizing certain fundamental concepts, we have toured the United States and are touring Europe to promote our ideas, courses, and publications. You've been reading Underground Theory.
Amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run a review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Timenergy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag Free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first, obviously, I have to get freed myself, so the two of us are able to do this because, you know, as Mikey said, build it and they will come. Well, I tried and I built a website and platform. I had my own app and everything, but it's been really buggy and it's more than one person can handle, and that's, you know what, a really good lesson for me. And so for now, what we're doing is moving it to a temporary intermediary platform until we are able to get some more serious funding. And ultimately, we want to be in a place like this, a real brick and mortar digital nomadic mecca where people can come from all over the world. But also, the app was really expensive, and so by quitting it, I am now able to save a lot of money, and with the help of my patrons and the students at Theory Underground, especially the monthly subscribers, I am officially able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. So thank you so much, everybody. This is one huge step forward. With that said, several subscribers did not migrate from the now defunct app to the new setup, and I'm guaranteed to lose people over time. So please, if you want to get involved, become a subscriber. If you're not even sure what this is all about but are just curious, then I've added Tier 0 and Tier 1 for very basic kinds of access to what we are doing behind the scenes. If you don't have any time or energy to get involved, but you do have some money to help support this project from afar, then please check out the Patreon. My patrons over at Patreon make the podcast and public YouTube possible. Thank you. As for once-in-a-lifetime events, check out the new poster for the American Idiots Theory Underground European Book Tour. Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Vienna, Linz, Krakow, Glasgow, London, and Oxford from April 27th to May 25th, 2024. 2 events are already fully booked out. Save a seat at an event by getting in contact with us ASAP. Finally, the call for proposals to our conference in Mexico.
What's up, everybody? TUCon 2024 update here. It's not happening in Mexico anymore, but it is still happening on October 24th through the 27th.
The change was made because a lot of the people that wanted to attend and that were expected to attend said they could probably afford to travel if they had more time advance notice. So save up for June 2025.
If you have to choose, right? Because this one that is happening this year is happening physically in Boise, Idaho, because we have a lot of collaborators and fellow travelers and co-instructors there. But you can attend virtually for this one. You won't be able to attend virtually next year. So yeah, if you have to choose, attend physically in 2025. The call for proposals already happened. The writing workshop for proposals already happened. You can still get the links to both of those. Just shoot us a message and ask for those links. We'll get you those. And the form goes live on June 1st, and the deadline is June 15th. So if you're attending physically, let me know ASAP.
Get in on it.
All right. Finally, last little thing here is to say thank you so much to my patrons over at Patreon. The Patreon is for people who are too busy to be students or subscribers at Theory Underground, but who want to see more of this free content on the podcast and YouTube channel for Theory Underground. You are the ones who see something of value in the free content being made available here, and you want to see more of it. Your patron pledges at Patreon are a real motivator for me, so thank you so much. Especially thanks to Marilyn Lawrence, Bert Vanderkar, Carl Vanderlip, Nikolai, Sahil Kumar, Zuxandra, Darian Large, Tyler Murphy, Max Mackin, Al, Algeri, Ben Rosenblum, Atlantic Airlines, Lewis, Matt Payne, Neil C., Simon Condon, Yiz, and Schwabkinson. Thank you.